He grabbed her wrist right there behind the bar, in front of everyone, and smiled while he did it. Not a violent grip, not the kind that leaves marks you can photograph. Just enough pressure to remind her that he still could. That no matter how far she'd run, no matter what name she was using or what city she'd chosen, Darren Cole believed she still belonged to him. Zuri felt her whole body go cold. 2 years of learning to be invisible, and here she was, caught in the open, under the lights, with nowhere to go. She had rebuilt herself in this bar, piece by piece, shift by shift. And now he was standing in front of her with that public smile, the one that always fooled everyone, and she knew, that if she screamed, half the room would assume she was overreacting. What would you do if the person you escaped walked back into the room? If you've ever had to disappear to feel safe, this story is for you. Before we go further, if stories like this hit close to home, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end. Every week we bring you stories that don't let go. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The night Zuri Bennett arrived in Seattle, the rain was doing what Seattle rain always does. Not dramatic, not pouring, just relentlessly present, like it had nowhere else to be and had decided without asking that it would follow her inside. She carried 2 garbage bags up 4 flights of stairs to her older sister Amara's apartment, and she did not cry. She had made herself a promise somewhere on the I-5 in the dark, no more crying in front of people. She could fall apart when the lights went out and the door was locked, but not before. Amara opened the door before Zuri even knocked. She must have been watching from the window. "You didn't call," Amara said, which was not an accusation, just a fact. "I know." Amara looked at the garbage bags, looked at Zuri's left wrist, the one Zuri was holding at a careful angle, her fingers curled slightly inward. She didn't say anything about it. She stepped back and let her sister inside. That was the night Zuri stopped using her real name, not dramatically, not as some calculated act of reinvention. It happened the next morning when Amara was making coffee and said, "I talked to a friend of mine who manages a place. She owes me. She can get you a job." "What kind of place?" "A bar, private, invitation-only clientele, very controlled environment." Amara slid the mug across the counter. "You'd be bartending. You know how to do that?" "I can learn." The owner likes her staff to keep a low profile. Some of her regulars are particular about privacy. Zuri understood. Rich, probably powerful, men who didn't want their faces remembered in the wrong places. "Can I use a different name?" Amara didn't ask why. "I'll tell her you go by Renee," she said, and that was that. So Zuri Bennett became Renee for 4 months. Renee who didn't talk much. Renee who made excellent gin and tonics and who could pour 3 glasses without spilling a drop even when the booth behind her got loud. Renee who smiled professionally, thanked customers for their patience, and memorized their preferences without ever letting them feel studied. She was good at it, better than she expected. The Halcyon occupied the entire top floor of a hotel that presented itself as nothing special from the street. The exterior was deliberately understated. No signage beyond a small brass plate. Nothing to attract the kind of attention that generated reviews or photographs. You either knew it existed or you didn't. The elevator that accessed it required a card that only 100 or so people in Seattle possessed. Zuri spent the first 2 weeks watching the room the way she'd learned to watch every room. Cataloging exits, reading body language, measuring who was dangerous and who was just loud. Old instinct. 2 years of living with Darren had made her very good at reading the temperature of a space before any real trouble started. Most of the regulars were predictable. Tech money. Old family money. A few politicians who arrived through the service entrance. Men who wore expensive watches and spoke about acquisitions the way normal people talked about weather. Then there was the man in table 1. He was there every Thursday. Same booth, northwest corner. The seat with the full sight line to the room and direct sight lines to both entrances. Zuri noticed that immediately. You didn't pick that seat by accident. He arrived around 9. Always with several men who arranged themselves without discussion. 1 at the bar, 2 near the entrance, 1 seated beside him, and 1 across. Not obvious about it. Not security detail obvious. The kind that made everyone uncomfortable. They just moved like they'd practiced the geometry of a room for years. The man himself was Korean, mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested money not as a destination, but as a background condition. Dark suit, no tie. Never a tie, she noticed. He wore a watch that looked old enough to be an heirloom and that probably cost more than her car had before Darren sold the car for her. His name, according to the reservation under which the table was permanently booked, was Kang Tae-jun. She learned to pour his wine the way he preferred it, a very specific temperature, a very specific pour, nothing past the third line on the glass. She learned that he ordered the same thing every Thursday. One bottle, shared slowly across the evening with one associate, always the same associate, a lean older man named Mr. Park, who spoke even less than Tae-jun did. She learned that when he thanked her, it was real, not reflex. He actually looked at her for a moment and said thank you like it meant something. She noticed that he never looked at her the way most men did, not the obvious kind of looking, not the evaluating kind. He simply acknowledged she existed, as a person, in the same room as him. That, she realized, was more unusual than his money or his silence or the way everyone else in the room seemed slightly smaller when he was present. She didn't think about it too much. She was working on surviving, not on noticing men. The first sign came on a Tuesday. Zuri arrived through the staff entrance at the back of the building, an alley-facing door with a keypad that changed every month. She had her bag on one shoulder and was still unwrapping the scarf from around her neck when she saw it. One white carnation, set directly in front of the door. Not dropped, not blown there by wind, placed, deliberately. Upright, stem down, petals up. Her hand stopped moving. White carnations were not a coincidence. They were not a common flower. Darren had sent her white carnations on their first anniversary. He had told her, in that careful romantic way he had at the beginning, that white carnations meant pure love. He had made them their thing. Later, she understood that possessive people are very invested in making things theirs. She stood in the alley for a long moment, not touching it. A delivery truck rumbled past the far end. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. Then she took out her phone, photographed it from 3 angles, wrote down the date and time in the Notes app she'd started keeping 2 months ago, and went inside. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. The manager, a brisk Scottish woman named Vera, took her statement without visible alarm and forwarded it to the building's security team. Vera was discreet in the way that businesses built on discretion always were. She said she would look at the camera feeds. She did not say she would find anything useful. She didn't. The camera covering that angle had a 12-second dead zone every time the delivery door opened. Someone had timed it. Zuri filed a police report. The officer who took it was not dismissive exactly, but he was practical in the way people are when they're explaining why they can't help you yet. The flower alone, he said, wasn't enough. No direct threat. No evidence of who placed it. He told her to keep documenting. He told her to tell him if the situation escalated. She thanked him. She drove home. She sat in the park garage outside Amara's building for 11 minutes before going inside because she needed to be finished shaking before she saw her sister. After that night, she started carrying a small notebook. Every incident went into it. The hang-up calls, 3 in 1 week, always from numbers that routed to prepaid phones that couldn't be traced. The car that idled outside the building twice in one evening, gone by the time she looked directly at it. The feeling, during a walk to the grocery store, of being watched. The specific kind of sensation she had learned, over 2 years, to trust over her own doubts. She knew how Darren worked. She had been inside his logic long enough to understand it. He would not confront her directly until he had established enough presence that she already felt enclosed. First, he would make sure she knew he was nearby. Then he would make her doubt whether that knowledge was paranoia or reality. Then, when she was already unsteady, he would appear. She had left him. She had not escaped his playbook. The call came on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the flower. The Halcyon's public-facing phone number was listed for reservations only, answered by a service during off hours. At 7:15, as the bar was opening and Zuri was setting up the well, the hostess appeared at her shoulder. "There's a call. Someone asking for Renee." Zuri felt the cold move through her before she understood why. Only people who knew her here called her Renee, except one person who had no business knowing what name she was using. She took the phone. She didn't speak first. After 2 seconds, his voice came through. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing." She hung up. Her hands were not steady this time. She told Vera immediately. Vera pulled the call log. The number was a prepaid phone, unregistered, but it was documented. Vera, to her credit, called the detective handling the case herself that evening. By the following week, a stalking investigation had been formally opened. The detective, a tired-looking woman named Reyes who spoke in the flat cadence of someone who had managed to care professionally for many years, explained that what they had was still circumstantial, useful, building, but not yet sufficient for a protective order. They needed something more concrete, a direct threat, physical evidence linking him to the incidents. "You're doing everything right," Detective Reyes told her. "Keep doing it." Zuri thought, "I've been doing everything right for 2 years. It didn't stop anything." She didn't say that. She went back to work the next Thursday night, and she poured the wine, and she smiled when the situation required it, and she ran through the exits in her head the way she always did. Table 1 was occupied. Tae-jun was there at 9:17, as always. She brought the wine without being asked, because she'd memorized the preference, and he said thank you without looking up from the folder he was reviewing, and then a moment later he did look up, and he said, "Are you all right?" Zuri blinked. No one in this bar had ever asked her that, not as a real question. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her for one more moment, not pressing, not skeptical in a way that demanded she perform fine better, just seeing. Then he nodded and looked back at his folder. She walked back to the bar and stood very still for a moment with her back to the room. She didn't know what to do with a man who noticed and didn't push. The Thursday night Darren walked into the Halcyon was the 3rd week of November. The room was full, a private event wrapping up at one end, the usual Thursday regulars at the other, noise level elevated in a way that meant she had to lean slightly forward to hear orders. The hostess was managing a small backup at the entrance. The coat check had a line. Zuri was reaching for a bottle of scotch when she felt it. Not heard, not saw. Felt. The particular shift in the air that her body associated with him. The trained response. 2 years of calibrating herself to his moods, his rhythms, his approach. It had left something in her nervous system that operated independently of her conscious mind. She was already putting the bottle down and turning before she'd identified what she was responding to. He was standing at the end of the bar. Dark jacket. Hair shorter than she remembered. The smile, God, the smile, already in position. The one that said, "I'm perfectly reasonable. I'm here calmly. Whatever problem exists, it's coming from you." Her mind caught up. Her body had already started backing toward the service well. "Hey." His voice was casual, conversational, as if he had run into her at a grocery store. "I just want to talk." The bartender beside her, a young guy named Marcus, started to move toward them instinctively, but Darren shifted just enough to put himself in the primary line of the bar, the position that made it awkward for Marcus to intervene without making it a scene. He had calculated the geometry of the room. Of course he had. "You need to leave," Zuri said. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted, but it came out steady. That mattered. "Zuri, come on." He used her real name, deliberately, a reminder that he knew her, that the name she'd been hiding behind was no protection. "I drove all the way here, just 5 minutes. Leave, right now." Something moved behind his eyes. The smallest tell. The one that meant the performance was getting difficult to maintain. I'm being clear." She held his gaze. "Leave." He leaned forward and his hand came across the bar and closed around her wrist. The pressure was not violent. It never was. It was the specific pressure that said, I will if I choose to. You know what this means." And she did know. Her body responded before she could stop it, the familiar shrinking, the automatic calculation of how to make this stop with the least damage. Then the hand on her wrist, Darren's hand, went still. A different hand had settled onto Darren's shoulder. Kang Tae-jun stood directly behind him. He had not rushed over. He had simply moved, and he was there, and the temperature of the space around them had changed the way it changes before weather. The 2 men from his table were positioned, not close, not dramatic, just positioned, at angles that made the geometry of the room different than it had been 20 seconds ago. Tae-jun looked at the hand on Zuri's wrist. Then he looked at the man it belonged to. He didn't raise his voice. "She asked you to leave." Darren turned, assessed. He was not unintelligent. He could read a room, which was part of what made him effective. He saw the stillness in Tae-jun's face and recalculated. "This is a private conversation," Darren said. "No." Tae-jun's voice was absolutely even. "It isn't." Darren's hand was still on Zuri's wrist. He hadn't moved it. He was establishing that he hadn't been made to. "You should mind your business," Darren said. Tae-jun did not respond immediately. He took 1 second, the deliberate kind, and in that second he let Darren feel exactly how the room had rearranged itself. The men at the bar. The men near the door. The absolute absence of concern on Tae-jun's face that made his stillness more dangerous than any raised voice. "This is my last request," Tae-jun said. "Not a threat. A fact." Darren looked at Zuri. She knew what he was doing. He was waiting for her to fold, to manage the situation, to reach across and quietly diffuse this the way she had learned to diffuse every situation that became inconvenient for him. Apologize with her eyes. Make a small gesture that told him she'd handle it. She didn't move. She met his eyes, and she held them, and she said nothing. Darren released her wrist. He stepped back. He pulled his jacket straight with the specific movement of a man reasserting dignity he hadn't actually lost, in his own mind. He walked toward the entrance. He didn't look back. And Zuri stood behind the bar with her hand resting flat on the cold surface, and she watched him go, and she did not follow, did not call after him, did not feel the reflex to smooth over the scene he had just made. She just watched him walk out. Marcus appeared at her shoulder. "You okay?" "Yeah." She looked at her wrist. No visible mark. There never was. "I need to call my detective." She reached under the bar for her phone. Behind her, she heard Tae-jun walk back toward table 1. No comment. No lingering. Just the quiet return to his seat, as if he had simply done what the moment required and had no interest in being thanked for it. She pulled up Detective Reyes' number. Her thumb was steady on the screen. That, she thought, was new. Detective Reyes answered on the second ring, which told Zuri she had been expecting the call. "He came in," Zuri said. She kept her voice low, turned slightly away from the bar. Marcus was handling the orders, moving with careful precision, pretending he wasn't listening. He grabbed my wrist. There were cameras, there were witnesses. A pause on the line, papers moving. "Where are you now?" "Still at work?" "He left about 4 minutes ago." "Don't touch anything he might have contacted. Don't leave the building until I tell you it's clear." Another pause, longer. "This is what we needed, Zuri. This changes the picture." Zuri looked at her wrist. The skin was unmarked. It always was. "Okay," she said. She hung up and stood there for a moment with the phone pressed flat against her sternum, feeling her own heartbeat through the case. Then she put the phone in her apron pocket and went back to work. Because the bar didn't stop needing tending, just because her life had just tilted on its axis. And she had learned a long time ago that the best thing she could do in the immediate aftermath of something terrible was to keep her hands moving. Vera appeared at 11:15 after the room had thinned out. She placed a hand briefly on Zuri's forearm, not asking anything, just acknowledging, and said the security footage from 3 angles had already been copied and would be transmitted to the detective's office by morning. "The camera above the well got his face and the contact," Vera said quietly. "Clear enough," Zuri exhaled. "Good. You don't have to stay for close." "I want to." Vera studied her for a moment, then nodded and walked away. At the northwest corner, table 1 was empty. Tae-jun and his people had left sometime around 11, quietly, the way they always left. No fanfare. The only evidence they'd been there was the single wine glass, rinsed, not washed, as Tae-jun always requested, because he found the detergent smell intrusive, and a folded bill under the edge of the coaster. Zuri cleared the table herself. She didn't know why. The protective order came through 11 days later. Detective Reyes called her at 8 in the morning while Zuri was still in Amara's kitchen, standing at the counter eating toast she didn't taste. "It's signed," Reyes said. "He cannot come within 500 feet of you, your workplace, or your sister's address. He cannot contact you by any means. Violation is immediate arrest." Zuri set the toast down. "Okay. You understand this doesn't make you physically safe. It makes any contact a crime. There's a difference." "I know. I want you to keep documenting. Keep your phone charged. Any breach, any sense of his presence, you call me before you call anyone else." "Okay." After she hung up, she stood at the window for a while. The rain was doing its usual thing. Below on the street, a man walked a dog past a woman pushing a stroller, and a delivery truck idled at the corner, and nobody down there knew that her life had just been handed back to her with a piece of legal paper that did and did not mean everything. Amara came in from the bedroom and looked at her face. It went through? Yeah. Amara sat down at the kitchen table. She was quiet for a moment, then, how do you feel? Zuri thought about it honestly, the way she was trying to do more of, actually consulting herself before answering instead of producing the convenient answer. Like I'm waiting for the other shoe, she said. Amara nodded. She didn't argue with that. Darren disappeared for 3 weeks, not from her mind, never from her mind, but from her physical world. No flowers, no calls, no vehicles idling, no sensation of being followed on the walk from the bus stop to the building entrance. The absence was so complete that it started to feel like a presence of its own, a specific silence that she didn't fully trust. She told Detective Reyes that. Reyes said, "That instinct is usually right. Stay alert." Zuri stayed alert. At the Halcyon, something had shifted after the night Darren appeared. Not dramatically. Not in a way that changed the surface of things. But the staff moved around her slightly differently now. Marcus refilled her prep supplies without being asked. The hostess began giving her early warning when unfamiliar faces appeared at the entrance. Vera stopped by the bar once per shift to check in, nothing intrusive, just present. She hadn't asked for any of it. It simply materialized the way care sometimes does when people have witnessed something they can't unfeel. Tae-jun, on the following Thursday, arrived at the same time and occupied the same table. He ordered the same wine. She brought it to him. When she set the glass down, he looked up. "The situation is being handled?" he asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "That must have been frightening." Not any of the things people said when they wanted credit for noticing. Just, "Is the problem being addressed?" "Yes," she said. He nodded, looked back at the paper in front of him. She stood there for one extra beat, long enough that it was almost awkward. Then, "I wanted to say thank you for the other night." He looked up again. "You were already handling it," he said. "I just made sure you didn't have to handle that moment alone." She didn't have a response to that. She wasn't sure she'd ever been given language quite that specific for what had happened. She went back to the bar. The Thursday after that, Tae-jun arrived, and the usual arrangement settled into its geometry. Mr. Park across from him, the other men in their positions, the wine appearing at the correct temperature, the room doing its thing around them. Normal, controlled. At 9:45, a man Zuri hadn't seen before appeared at the end of the bar. Late 40s, Korean, suit that had been expensive 3 years ago. He ordered whiskey, which was not unusual, but he kept his eyes moving in a way that was. She poured the drink and watched him without watching him, using the mirror behind the liquor shelf. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at table 1. When she brought a water refill to a nearby table, she passed close enough to catch the end of something. A low exchange between him and Mr. Park, who had left the booth and appeared beside the man without Zuri having seen him move. Mr. Park's voice was very quiet. "This isn't the place." The man said something back in Korean, too low and fast for Zuri to track. Mr. Park said, "Leave." The man finished his whiskey in one pull, set the glass down with a sound that was not quite a slam but close, and walked out. Zuri noted it, filed it, did not ask. That was something she had learned at the Halcyon. There were rooms where curiosity was fine and rooms where it was expensive, and part of her job was knowing the difference. The crack appeared on a Tuesday, during the lunch shift she picked up to cover a sick colleague. The Halcyon ran a private lunch service twice a week for a much smaller group. Business meetings, mostly, the kind that required a room where nothing was recorded. Zuri was behind the bar restocking when the door from the service elevator opened and Vera appeared, moving faster than usual. "I need to speak with you." Zuri followed her to this back office. Vera closed the door. "A man called this morning." Vera's voice was doing the thing it did when she was managing information carefully, flat, deliberate, each word placed before the next. "He asked for you by your real name." Zuri felt the cold again. "My real name?" "Yes." "Not Renee," he said. Vera glanced at the notepad on her desk. He said, Tell Zuri Bennett I'm not going anywhere. The room didn't change size. Rooms don't actually do that. But for a moment it felt as though the walls had moved inward by several inches. Did you record it? The service records all incoming calls automatically. The detective already has it. Zuri sat down in the chair across from Vera's desk without being invited. Her legs had made the decision independently. He violated the order. The call came from a phone registered to a business address in Tacoma. The detective is running it. Zuri pressed her palms flat against her thighs. He knows my real name. He knows I'm using a different one here, which means he has access to something. She stopped, rebuilt the logic. He knows someone who knows something about where I am. Vera was very still. The reservation system here uses my real name in the employee records, Zuri said. Those records are internal only. I know. She looked up. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just building the picture. Vera nodded slowly. I've already asked IT to do a full audit of who accessed personnel files in the last 60 days. Thank you. Zuri. Vera waited until she looked at her. This establishment has resources that most workplaces don't. I want you to know that I intend to use them. It was the most she had ever said that directly about what the Halcyon actually was and who it actually served. Zuri understood what she meant, and she filed that understanding carefully, and she said, I appreciate that. She went back to the bar. She restocked the vermouth. She polished 3 glasses that didn't need polishing. She thought about the fact that Darren had found her real name here, in the one place she had believed she was invisible. Then she stopped thinking about it and called Detective Reyes. The audit didn't produce a name. It produced an access timestamp from a login that belonged to a junior administrative assistant who had been out sick on the day of the access. Someone had used her credentials. The assistant was cleared within 48 hours. She had no connection to Darren, no motive, and her distress when interviewed was the kind that couldn't be manufactured. The credentials had been taken, which meant Darren had help, which meant he was no longer working alone, which meant the situation had expanded. Reyes laid it out for Zuri over the phone with the same flat efficiency she used for everything. He has an accomplice, or he hired someone, Reyes said. Either way, he put resources into finding you. This is not impulsive behavior. This was planned. I know how he works, Zuri said. He's been planning since before I left. I believe you. I need you to believe that I believe you. Zuri exhaled. What do we do? We keep building the case. The call violated the protective order. That's an arrest warrant if we can prove he made the call, and we're working on that. The credential theft adds a separate charge. We're close. How close? A pause that lasted long enough to tell her the answer was not as close as she needed. Close, Reyes repeated. Keep your head down. Don't go anywhere alone at night. Don't take routes you take regularly. Zuri looked at the ceiling of Amara's living room, where she was sitting with her shoes on like she might need to leave quickly. I've been doing all of that, she said, for months. I know. Reyes's voice shifted slightly. The professional surface thinned just enough to let something more human through. You're doing everything right. I know that's not always enough, and I know it doesn't feel fair. Keep doing it anyway. She hung up. Amara was in the kitchen doorway. She had heard enough. Come eat something, she said. I'm not hungry. I know you're not. Come eat something anyway. Zuri got up. She went into the kitchen. She sat at the table and ate the food her sister put in front of her, and she stared at the window, and outside the Seattle night did its indifferent thing. The fight happened on a Wednesday night, and it was Zuri's fault, and she knew it, even as it was happening. It started because Amara mentioned, in the tone of someone who has been holding something back for a while and can't hold it anymore, that she had spoken to their mother. Zuri went still. About what? About what's been happening. She was worried because she hadn't heard from you in Amara. Almost 2 months, and I couldn't keep lying to her about why. I didn't ask you to lie. I asked you not to say anything. Those aren't different things, Zuri. The sharpness in Zuri's voice surprised even herself. They are completely different things. Not saying something is a choice. Lying is a story. I didn't want our mother building a story around this because the moment she knows, the moment she starts calling and worrying and telling me what I should have done differently, she's not going to... She always does. Zuri pushed back from the table. She always does. She turned my leaving him into a conversation about how I pick men, Amara. 2 weeks after I left, when I was still shaking, she told me I had a pattern. Amara was quiet. She's not wrong, she said finally. And immediately, I'm not defending her. I'm saying it's complicated and she loves you in a complicated way and she's frightened and I didn't know what to tell her. Zuri stood at the counter with her back to her sister. Her throat was doing something she was trying to control. What did you tell her? That you were okay, that you were working, that you were safe. Am I? The word landed in the room and both of them felt the weight of it. Amara said quietly, You're safer than you were. That's not the same thing. No. A long pause. It isn't. Zuri turned around. Her sister looked tired in the way that only people who have been carrying someone else's weight for a long time look tired. Not just sleep-deprived, but hollowed out around the edges. I'm sorry, Zuri said, for making this your problem too. Stop it. You didn't make anything. He did. I chose him. You were 25 and he was charming and smart, and he hid what he was for almost 8 months before you saw it. That is not a character flaw. That is a person being deliberately deceived by a skilled manipulator. Amara's voice had gone to the place it went when she was done with diplomacy. Stop giving him credit for what he did to you by calling it your mistake. Zuri didn't answer. The tears were very close and she was not going to cry. She went to bed instead. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain and thought about Tae-jun saying, I just made sure you didn't have to handle that moment alone. She didn't know why that kept coming back to her. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. Thursday came. She went to work. She moved through the shift with the mechanical efficiency she had perfected, smiling where required, present enough to function, absent enough to survive. The room filled. The usual Thursday geometry assembled itself. Tae-jun arrived at 9:11. She brought the wine. He thanked her. He was reading something. Not a folder this time, but a series of photographs spread across the table, which he gathered together when she approached. She caught a glimpse of shipping documents and nothing else because she was not looking to see more than she should. At 10:40, his associate Mr. Park appeared at the bar. She had never spoken to Mr. Park outside of taking his drink order, which was always sparkling water with lime. He was somewhere between 55 and 70. His face was the kind that aged into severity and stayed there. He wore his suit like a man who had worn suits for 40 years and hadn't noticed them in 39. He ordered his water. While she was reaching for the lime, he said, without looking at her, He's asked about you. She paused, came back with the glass, set it down. Excuse me? Tae-jun. Park looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were the color of good slate. He mentioned you, outside of this room. That doesn't happen. Zuri didn't know what to do with that, so she said, Okay. I'm not telling you because I think it's romantic. His voice was entirely without warmth, but not unkind. I'm telling you because you seem like a person who prefers to know things. I do, she said. He nodded once, took his water and walked back to the table. She stared at the lime she was still holding for a moment. Then she put it on the cutting board and went back to the job. The photograph arrived at 12 minutes past midnight on the following Monday. Zuri was asleep when her phone vibrated. She was a light sleeper now. She had become one over the past year, and she was awake and reaching for it before the second buzz. Unknown number. The message was a photograph. It took her eyes a moment to understand what she was looking at in the dark. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, compression artifacts along the edges from the digital zoom. But clear enough. It was her. Leaving the staff entrance of the Halcyon, the timestamp at the bottom of the image, visible because Darren, or whoever he'd hired, had not thought to remove it, read 11:47 p.m. 3 nights ago. She was wearing the green coat she'd bought 2 months ago with her first paycheck, the one Darren had never seen. He'd found her anyway. She was carrying her bag over her left shoulder the way she always did. She was looking at her phone. A second message appeared before she could process the first. A piece of paper won't protect you forever. She sat up in the dark. Her body was doing the complete inventory it now ran automatically when something like this happened. Heart rate elevated, hands steady, breathing controlled, jaw clenched on the left side where she'd been grinding her teeth for 4 months. She noticed all of it. She let none of it make her decisions. She screenshotted both messages. She forwarded them to Detective Reyes with a message. Violation. Image attached. Timestamp indicates surveillance 3 nights ago. She sat in the dark bedroom for 40 seconds, listening to the building around her. Then she sent a second message to Reyes. I think he's outside tonight. She moved to the window, stayed to the side of it, not in front of it, old instinct, and looked down at the street. A car she didn't recognize was parked across from the building, dark-colored, engine off. She could not tell from this angle whether anyone was inside. Her thumb hovered over Reyes's number. Then she stopped. She looked at the car, she looked at the phone, and then she did something she had not done once in 4 months of managing this alone. She scrolled past Reyes's number and stopped at a contact she had added 2 weeks ago, after Vera had quietly provided it without explanation, simply saying, "In case." The contact read, KTJ. She stared at it. The rain was picking up against the window. The car across the street hadn't moved. She thought about what Mr. Park had said at the bar. He mentioned you outside of this room, and that doesn't happen. She thought about a man who was powerful enough to make other powerful men go quiet, who had stood behind Darren in that bar and not raised his voice and not needed to. She thought about the fact that she had a detective, a protective order, a documented case, and a stalker who had just sent her a photograph of herself from 3 nights ago, taken through a telephoto lens from somewhere she couldn't identify. She put the phone face down on the bed. She picked it back up. She pressed call on the contact that read KTJ. It rang once. Yes. His voice was awake. Not groggy. Not the voice of a man pulled from sleep. Just present. It's Zuri. She heard herself say it. Her real name, her actual name, the name she was taking back one use at a time. I think I'm being watched right now, outside my building. A silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds. Are you inside? Yes? Stay inside. Lock everything. Don't go to the windows. I already... She stopped. There's a car across the street. I can't tell if anyone's in it. I'll send someone to check. It will take 8 minutes. His voice hadn't changed pitch or pace, but something in it had settled, the way a person settles when they have shifted from listening to acting. Keep this line open. She looked at the car. She thought, this is the moment Darren would tell me I'm overreacting. She thought, Tae-jun hasn't said that once. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark with the phone against her ear, and outside the rain came down, and the car sat still across the street, and she waited. 7 minutes and 40 seconds later, her phone buzzed with a text from the same line. Car is empty. Registered address in Renton. We're running the plate now. She exhaled through her nose. Then Tae-jun's voice. Still with me? Yeah. The car is empty. Someone parked it there, possibly deliberately, possibly not. My people will watch the building tonight. You don't have to. I know. A pause. Try to sleep. That's... She almost laughed. Almost. That's not going to happen. I know that too. Another pause, and when he spoke again, there was something different in it. Not softer exactly, but less managed. What you're dealing with takes more from a person than they realize while it's happening. You don't have to hold all of it tonight. She didn't answer right away. Then, that's the most you've ever said to me at once. A beat. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation. This time she did laugh, a small exhausted sound that she immediately wanted to take back because it felt too exposed. Get some rest, he said. I'll have someone at the building until morning. She lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, phone on the pillow beside her. She did not sleep for an hour. But for the first time in 4 months, the darkness outside the window felt slightly less like a place where something was waiting for her, and slightly more like a place where something was watching over her instead. And she was too tired and too honest with herself to pretend that distinction didn't matter. She did not sleep until 4 in the morning, and when she did, it was the kind of sleep that felt like falling rather than resting. Sudden, graceless, her body simply giving out beneath her while her mind was still running its loops. She woke at 7:14 to 3 texts from Detective Reyes. The first, violation confirmed. Warrant issued for Darren Cole's arrest. We're locating him now. The second, sent 11 minutes later. Plate on the vehicle came back registered to a Shell LLC. We're digging. The third, sent at 6:50 a.m. Call me when you're up. Zuri sat on the edge of the bed. Her green coat was still on. Her shoes were still on. The phone on the pillow beside her showed the call log from last night. KTJ, 41 minutes. She looked at that for a moment. Then she called Reyes. "We have the warrant," Reyes said, no preamble. "The photograph he sent you was taken with a telephoto lens from an elevated position. The metadata wasn't fully scrubbed. He's using consumer software, not professional. We pulled a partial location signature. Combined with the timestamp, we can put him within 2 blocks of the Halcyon on Friday night. That's a violation of the order. Multiple violations. The message, the surveillance, the photograph. Each one is a separate count." A pause. "We're going to find him today. I want you to stay home. I have a shift, Zuri." "I know." She pressed her fingers against her left eye socket, where a headache was building. "I know what you're going to say. Stay home. Let us work. I'll call you the moment we have him." She agreed. She hung up. She looked at the window where the rain had stopped overnight and left the glass streaked in gray. She thought, he's out there right now, moving, planning the next thing. She thought, he has been 3 steps ahead this whole time. She thought, the warrant means nothing if they can't find him. She got up and went to the kitchen. Amara was already gone, early shift at the hospital, gone before 6. The apartment had the specific quiet of a space that belongs to someone else, a guest room quality that Zuri had been living inside for 4 months. She made coffee she didn't want and stood at the kitchen window looking at the street below. The dark car was gone. In its place, an unremarkable gray sedan was parked at the corner. She watched it for 60 seconds. A man in his 40s got out, bought a coffee from the cart on the corner, got back in. She recognized the profile from the Halcyon, one of Tae-jun's perimeter people. She didn't know how to feel about that. The practical part of her said, "You have a stalker with resources and an arrest warrant that hasn't connected with its target yet, and having eyes on the building is good regardless of whose eyes they are." The other part of her, the part that had spent 2 years having someone decide what was good for her, noticed the watching and felt the edge of something old and uncomfortable. She made herself identify the difference. Darren watched her to control her. The man in the gray sedan was there because she'd made a phone call and asked for help. She had initiated it. She could end it. Those were not the same situation. She repeated that to herself twice. Then she drank the coffee and called her sister. Amara picked up on the third ring, the slightly breathless tone of someone between patients. "They're getting him today," Zuri said. "Reyes has a warrant." "Okay." A pause. She could hear a door closing, Amara stepping somewhere private. "How are you?" "I called Tae-jun last night." Silence. "I was looking at the car outside and I don't know why I called him instead of you. I think I didn't want to wake you. I think I also—" She stopped. "I don't know. Did it help?" She thought about 41 minutes in the dark with his voice on the line and someone checking the car and the building being watched until morning. "Yes," she said. Amara was quiet for a moment. "He's a complicated person to be indebted to." "I know what he is." "Do you?" Zuri felt something sharpen in her chest. "He's never been anything other than exactly what he is around me. I can't say that about most people." Another pause. "I just want you to be careful." "I've been careful for 4 months, Amara. I'm exhausted from careful." She heard her sister exhale. "I know. I'll call you when Reyes has him." She hung up. She went to the bathroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. The circles under her eyes, the tension along her jaw, the way she was holding her shoulders like she was bracing for impact. She turned the shower on as hot as she could stand it. She stayed in until the water started to cool. Reyes called at 2:17 in the afternoon. "We missed him." Zuri sat down on the couch. "What?" "He was at the address in Renton, an associate's apartment, turns out. By the time we got there, he was gone. Maybe 2 hours ahead of us." Reyes's voice was controlled, but Zuri had learned to hear the seams. There was something tighter underneath it. "The associate is being questioned. We're running down 2 other addresses." "He knew you were coming." A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "We don't know that yet." "He knew." Zuri stood back up. Standing was better. "He's been 1 step ahead this entire time. The credential theft, the shell company, the scrubbed metadata. He's had help the whole way. Someone is telling him things. We're aware of that possibility. That's not the same as saying you're doing something about it." "Zuri," Reyes's voice shifted. I understand your frustration. He sent me a photograph of myself taken 3 days ago, and you have a warrant, and he's still out there." Her voice didn't break. She was very careful about that. "What do I do right now, concretely? What do I do?" "Stay where you are. Keep your phone on. Don't open the door for anyone you haven't verified. I'll have a patrol car on your block within the hour." "Okay. We will find him." She hung up. She stood in the middle of Amar's living room and breathed. Then she picked up her notebook, the one she had been keeping since the first flower, small pages dense with dates and times and details. And she sat down and she read it from the beginning, all of it, every documented incident in chronological order. She was looking for the pattern she had missed, the one that explained how he'd stayed ahead, the one that told her where the leak was. She read for an hour and 40 minutes, and then she found it. It was small. It could have been coincidence. She almost missed it twice. The hang-up calls had started 3 days after she mentioned to a coworker, a woman named Bria, who'd worked at the Halcyon for 2 years, that she was staying at her sister's place in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. She had not given the specific address. She had said Capitol Hill, and within 72 hours the calls began. The credential theft had been logged on a Tuesday. Bria had been scheduled that day and had called in sick. Her login had been used while she was supposedly at home. The car outside the building the previous night had been parked in a spot directly across from the building's main entrance, a spot that was not visible from the street-level camera, but that was visible from the staff parking exit. The only people who knew the staff used that exit were staff. Zuri went back through 3 months of her notebook. Every time the situation had escalated, there had been a conversation at work in the preceding 48 to 72 hours. Every time she had mentioned something, her schedule change, her route, the time she expected to finish a shift, there had been a corresponding incident within 3 days. Not every time, not cleanly. There were gaps that could explain it away, but enough. She sat with the notebook open on her knee and felt the specific nausea of a realization that rearranges everything you thought you understood. Bria. Bria, who had worked beside her for 4 months. Bria, who was the first person who had told her she was brave for leaving. Bria, who brought her coffee on the hard nights and asked about the case with the right combination of concern and indignation. Bria, who knew her schedule, her route preferences, the name she was using. Bria, who had been the one to mention, 3 weeks ago, that the staff entrance had a dead zone in the camera coverage because she thought the building should fix it. Zuri sat very still. She thought, I could be wrong. She thought, I've been wrong about people before. Seriously wrong. Catastrophically wrong. My judgment has not proven reliable. She thought, but this pattern is not ambiguous. She called Reyes. I need you to look at someone, she said. An employee at the Halcyon. Her name is Bria Landau. Reyes called back in 40 minutes, which was faster than Zuri expected. Bria Landau has a prior address in common with Darren Cole, Reyes said. A rental in Shoreline 4 years ago. They overlapped by 14 months. The room went very quiet. They know each other, Zuri said. They did. Whether that relationship is current is what we're working on. It's current. Zuri stood up, moved to the window, stopped herself from going to it directly. She's been inside my life for 4 months. She knows everything. We're bringing her in for questioning. I need you to not contact her, not tip her off. Don't go into work until we've spoken with her. I wasn't planning to. She pulled back from the window. Does this change where you think he is? It changes where we're looking. If she's been in contact with him, she may know where he's been staying. After she hung up, Zuri stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the counter, the cold laminate surface under her palms. Bria. She thought about every conversation they'd had, every shift, every coffee. Every time Bria had asked how the case was going and Zuri had answered because Bria was safe, Bria was on her side. Bria was one of the people who made this bearable. She had been performing friendship to keep a leash on the investigation from the inside, and Zuri had been grateful for it. She pushed herself off the counter and went to the bedroom and sat on the bed and stared at the wall. She thought about what Reyes had said months ago. I want you to believe that I believe you. She had believed the wrong person. Again. The thought arrived with the specific weight of a thing you already knew at some level, which makes it worse rather than better. Bria denied it for the first 40 minutes of the interview. Reyes told Zuri this later in the clipped summary she used when she was telling the facts and leaving the emotion to whoever was receiving them. Bria had denied knowing Darren in any current capacity, denied accessing the employee files, denied the car, denied all of it, with the specific confidence of someone who believed they had covered well. Then Reyes put the phone records on the table. 42 calls between Bria's cell number and a prepaid phone registered to the Tacoma LLC in the past 90 days. Bria stopped talking. Then she asked for a lawyer, which told them what they needed to know. She's not one out of this, Reyes told Zuri. She's looking at conspiracy charges, accessory to stalking, multiple counts. Her lawyer is going to tell her to cooperate, and she's going to tell us where Darren is. When? Possibly tonight, tomorrow at the latest, once the lawyer has explained the sentencing math. Zuri pressed the phone against her cheek. Outside the window, the gray sedan at the corner was still there, steady and unremarkable. What do I do until then? Stay where you are. Don't go out alone. Call me if anything changes. She stayed. Nothing changed that night. Nothing changed the following morning. At 11 a.m., Reyes called to say that Bria's lawyer had made contact, but that Bria was still negotiating terms. The process was moving. It was just not moving fast enough. Zuri called Vera, who already knew Reyes had contacted her the previous evening. Take the time you need, Vera said. Her voice had the same careful flatness as always, the one that covered things she did not say directly. Your position is secure. Thank you. Bria has been suspended pending the outcome. A pause. I want you to know that what happened here was not a failure of the environment. We had no reason to… Vera. Zuri kept her voice even. You couldn't have known. Neither could I. She hung up. She was in the middle of making lunch, something simple, bread and cheese, standing at the counter because sitting felt too passive, when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it. She almost set it face down and kept cutting the bread. Instead, she picked it up. The text read, Bria was always loyal to me, just so you know. You trusted the wrong person and you didn't even see it coming. You never do. She read it twice. Her hands had gone completely still. It was Darren. Untraceable number, probably another prepaid, probably purchased since this morning. He knew about Bria, which meant he was monitoring the situation, which meant he had another source, or he was closer than they thought. She forwarded it to Reyes immediately. Then she typed her own reply. Something she hadn't done, had been told not to do, but her hands typed it before the practical part of her brain could override the other part. She typed, You should leave Seattle. She deleted it. She typed, I'm not afraid of you. She deleted that too. She put the phone face down on the counter. She stood very still for a moment. Then she picked it up and called Tae-jun. He answered on the first ring this time. He has another contact, she said, or he's close enough to monitor what's happening in real time. He just texted me about Bria. A brief silence. I'll find out. How? Don't ask me that. It was the first time he'd said something like that to her. The first time the other side of him had appeared directly in conversation. Not implied, not suggested by the way rooms changed when he entered them, but stated. She heard it clearly. There are things I do that you should not know. She thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. Okay, she said, stay inside. Keep the detective informed of every contact from him. I know. Zuri. He paused in a way that she had started to recognize. It meant he was choosing the words carefully rather than reaching for the first ones available. He wants you to feel like he's everywhere. That's the strategy. It doesn't mean he is everywhere. I know what the strategy is, she said. I lived inside it for 2 years. Another pause. You're right. I'm sorry. She blinked. She hadn't expected that. I'll call you if anything changes, she said. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, bread half cut on the counter. She thought, he apologized without being asked to. She thought, stop noticing that. It's not the right time to notice that. She finished cutting the bread. The call from Reyes came at 4:58 p.m. Bria gave us an address, a rental property in Beacon Hill, a basement apartment, paid cash through the LLC, not in any system we had flagged. Reyes's voice had an edge to it that Zuri hadn't heard before. Forward-leaning, tight. We're going there now. I need you to stay absolutely where you are and not communicate with anyone until I call back. Is he there? We don't know yet. Stay put. She stayed. She sat on the couch with her phone in both hands, and she counted her breaths the way a therapist had taught her to once, before Darren decided therapy was something she was using against him and she stopped going. 4 in. Hold for 4. Out for 6. She did this for 27 minutes. Then Reyes called. He was there, Reyes said. He's gone. Cleared out recently. Food still cold in the refrigerator, clothes left behind. He ran. The breath Zuri had been holding for 27 minutes came out in one controlled exhale. He knew you were coming. Yes. Reyes's voice had gone flat in a way that meant she was managing anger, which means there's still a line somewhere we haven't found. Inside the department? I don't know yet. I'm looking. The implications of that sat in the room with Zuri for a moment. He's still out there, she said. He's still out there. But he's running now instead of watching. That's a different situation. Is it better? Cornered animals are more dangerous than patient ones. A pause. Yes. And no. After she hung up, Zuri sat with the phone in her lap and watched the light outside Amara's window shift from afternoon gray to early evening gray, which in Seattle in November was barely a distinction at all. She thought about Darren in some other apartment she didn't know. Moving. Recalculating. Angrier than he'd been when he was still in control, because men like Darren experienced loss of control as a personal injury, something done to them, rather than a consequence of what they'd done. She thought about the leak inside the department, the thread they hadn't found yet, the fact that every wall she'd built had a door in it someone she trusted had left open. She thought, I cannot stay in this apartment indefinitely. She thought, I cannot continue to wait for other people to contain this. She thought, Darren is running scared, and a scared Darren is a Darren who makes one catastrophic, irreversible, final decision instead of 100 careful small ones. She picked up her notebook. She opened it to a blank page. She wrote at the top, what does he do when he has nothing left to lose? She stared at the question. She knew the answer. She'd seen it once before, in the last week before she left him. That specific moment when the performance finally cracked all the way through and what was underneath came to the surface without any of the usual management. It was the scariest she had ever seen him, and it was exactly what he was about to become again. She picked up her phone and called Tae-jun. It rang 4 times before he picked up. He's running, she said, which means he's about to do something. A pause, then, yes. You already know this. I had a sense of it an hour ago. What did you find out? Silence for 2 seconds. There's a man who's been running his information, a private investigator, unlicensed, with a history of selling information to both sides of any arrangement he's in. He's been inside the detective's case file through a contact at the department records office. The cold moved through her differently this time. Not the fear cold of being watched, but the rage cold of understanding the full shape of what had been done. Someone inside the department, she said. A records clerk. Low access, but enough. He didn't have your location tonight. He had your general pattern. A pause. He doesn't know where you are right now. Are you sure? I put 2 people between you and the street 2 hours ago. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't push on it. What does he do next? She said. He knows he's losing. He's spent months building pressure to bring you back under control, and every move has failed. The order, the warrant, Bria's arrest. Tae-jun's voice was measured, but she could hear the thing underneath it. Not fear, because she did not think fear was a word that mapped onto him easily, but something alert and steady. When that kind of person loses his tools, he becomes the tool. He'll come directly. Yes. Then we have to decide what to do before he does. A pause that lasted long enough for the rain to pick back up outside the window, tapping against the glass in the specific Seattle rhythm she had been learning for 4 months. Tae-jun said, What do you want to do? And there it was again. The question. The choice returned to her, not assumed, not taken, given back every time. She thought about the girl who had apologized for things she hadn't done, who had managed situations that weren't her fault, who had learned to make herself small enough to fit inside someone else's idea of her. She thought about Zuri Bennett standing behind a bar with her hand flat on the cold surface, watching a man walk out without following. I want to set the terms, she said. Tae-jun was quiet for a moment. Tell me what you need, he said. She exhaled, and she began to talk. She talked for 22 minutes. Tae-jun listened without interrupting, which was something she had noticed about him. He did not fill silence with his own voice, did not offer responses before she had finished building the thought. He waited. And when she was done, he asked 2 questions, both of them practical, neither of them challenging what she had decided. The first, can you get Reyes to agree to it? I think so, if I explain why. You'll need to explain it without explaining everything. She understood what he meant. I know. The second question, are you sure you want to be the one visible in this? She had thought about that before she called him. She had sat with it for the full 27 minutes of counted breaths, and she had understood that the answer had to be yes, and she had understood why. He needs to come to me, she said. If someone else draws him out, it might work, but it will be for someone else's reasons and on someone else's terms. I've spent 2 years being managed by someone else's terms. This ends with mine. A long pause. All right, Tae-jun said. You're not going to tell me it's dangerous? You know it's dangerous. You don't need me to tell you that. She exhaled. I need until tomorrow morning to set it up, she said. I'll need the same. Call me at 8. She hung up. She sat in the dark apartment for a while longer, not thinking, just letting the decisions settle into her body the way decisions need to before they become real. Then she called Detective Reyes. Reyes said no 3 times before she said anything else. The first no came immediately, before Zuri had finished the second sentence. The second came after Zuri had explained the full outline, the controlled location, the documentation setup, the specific vulnerabilities she understood about Darren's current state of mind that no one else in this investigation had direct experience with. The third came quieter and slower, which meant Reyes was actually thinking. What you're describing, Reyes said carefully, is using yourself as bait. I'm describing using myself as the one variable he can't resist. There's a difference. Walk me through the difference. Bait is passive. It sits and waits to be taken. What I'm describing is active. I control the environment, the timing, and the communication. He thinks he's winning. He thinks I'm finally doing what he always wanted, which is reaching out first. He'll come because his ego won't let him not come. She paused. And when he gets there, you're already in position. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. What location are you proposing? The Halcyon, after close. He's already been inside, yet he knows the physical space. He'll feel like he has the advantage of prior access. He won't know you've had 12 hours to set the room. How do you plan to get him there? I send him a message from my number. I tell him I want to talk. I tell him I've been thinking and I want to understand why he can't let this go. And I think if we talk face to face one time, just once, I can move forward. Reyes made a sound, not quite a sound, more a controlled exhale. He'll know it's a setup, she said. He won't, because it sounds exactly like what I would have said 2 years ago. And he's been waiting for me to say it for 4 months. Zuri's voice was very steady. She had practiced this part in her head. Darren Cole believes, in a fundamental way, that I will eventually return to the version of myself that needed him. He has staked everything on that belief. When I send that message, every instinct he has, good ones and bad ones, will tell him it's real because it's what he's been waiting for. Another long silence. I need to think about this, Reyes said. How long? Tonight. I need an answer by 8 a.m. Zuri, he's running, detective. He's scared and angry, and he's about to do something we didn't plan for. This way we planned for it. Her voice didn't waver. I need an answer by 8. She hung up. She lay down on the bed without taking her shoes off. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the message she would have to write, the specific tone, the exact phrasing, the careful reconstruction of a Zuri she had worked very hard to leave behind, the one who reached out, who explained herself, who believed that if she could only make someone understand, they would stop hurting her. She was going to have to write like that woman one more time. Then she was going to make sure she never had to be her again. Well, Reyes called at 7:43 a.m. I've cleared it with my lieutenant, she said. Conditionally. The location holds, the timing holds. I need final approval of the message text before you send it, and I need you wired. Okay. I need 8 officers positioned before you make contact. That means we do this tomorrow night, not tonight. She stopped. That's too much time. It's 24 hours. He's moving. Every hour. 24 hours, Zuri. Non-negotiable. I'm trying to make sure you walk out of that building. She pressed her teeth together. Fine. And I need to know that whatever other resources you have in play are fully disclosed to me before this happens. A pause. What other resources? Zuri said. Don't do that. Reyes's voice was flat. I'm a detective. The car outside the building. The plate trace that came back to me faster than my own department runs plates. The fact that you had specific information about Darren's movements before I provided it. A pause. I don't need details. I need to know that whoever is involved is positioned in a way that doesn't get my officers killed or compromise the arrest. Zuri thought about Tae-jun, about the question she had promised herself she would not examine too closely. They'll be there, she said. They won't interfere with the arrest. They're insurance. Against what? Against anything you don't plan for. Reyes absorbed that. Tell your insurance to stay invisible. They're good at that. After she hung up, she called Tae-jun and told him the shape of it. He listened. He confirmed his people could position without being visible to law enforcement. He asked her once more if she was sure. She said yes. He said, write the message carefully. He knows your voice better than anyone. If it sounds like you performing yourself, he'll know. She thought about that. I know how to sound like who I was, she said. That's the part I don't have trouble with. She hung up and sat with the blank text message on her phone for 40 minutes. Then she wrote it. The message was 63 words. She had written and deleted versions for those 40 minutes. Versions that were too direct, too indirect, too formal, too raw. She knew Darren well enough to know that he would read every word the way he read everything, looking for evidence of her state of mind, for weakness, for access points. He would read it 3 times before responding. He would show it to no one. The final version read, I've been trying to understand why I can't stop being angry, and I think I need to hear from you directly. Not over the phone. I know what I'm supposed to want, but I also know I haven't been able to move forward, and I think there's something I need to say out loud, and so do you. The Halcyon. Tomorrow night. After 11. Come alone. She sent it to Reyes at 9:15. Reyes read it, made one small adjustment to the 3rd sentence at the legal team's recommendation, sent it back. Zuri read the adjusted version. It still sounded like her, like the version of her that existed before she understood what she was dealing with. She approved it. She hit send at 9:58 a.m. Then she put the phone face up on the kitchen table and made coffee and watched the screen. He read it at 10:14. The red receipt appeared. He still had her in his phone with red receipts on, which told her he had never stopped expecting to hear from her. He did not respond immediately. She counted the minutes. At 10:41, he replied. One word. Okay. She exhaled through her nose. Her hands were flat on the table. Her coffee was untouched. She picked up the phone and texted Reyes. He confirmed, tomorrow night. Then she texted Tae-jun the same. Tae-jun's reply came in 30 seconds. I know. She stared at that for a moment. Then she put the phone down and drank the cold coffee and started preparing for the longest 24 hours of her life. Amara came home at 6. Zuri had been sitting at the kitchen table for most of the afternoon, not doing nothing. She had been going through the case notebook again, this time not looking for patterns but for clarity, trying to bring the full shape of the past 4 months into sharp focus so that tomorrow night she would be operating on something more solid than adrenaline. Amara came through the door, set her bag down, looked at Zuri. What did you do? She said. It was not quite an accusation. It was the tone of a person who had been a sister for 28 years and could read the specific quality of trouble from across a room. I set something up for tomorrow night, Zuri said, with Ray sanctioned. Amara took her coat off very deliberately. She hung it on the hook by the door, which she always did, neat and automatic. Then she turned around. Tell me, Zuri told her. Amara listened without interrupting, which was rarer for her than for Tae-jun. Amara was a person who thought out loud, who processed through language, who asked questions as they occurred to her. The silence meant she was doing something different with this, holding it, turning it, understanding it before she responded. When Zuri finished, Amara sat down. You could have asked me, she said. Her voice was quiet. Not hurt exactly, something more like the adjacent thing. I know. I've been here the whole time. You could have said, I want to do something instead of waiting, and I would have. I know, Amara. Zuri looked at her directly. I didn't ask because I didn't want you to talk me out of it. And because if something goes wrong, I need someone who doesn't know the details. I need someone to be okay. Amara's jaw tightened. That's not... She stopped, started again. I'm not a backup person. I'm your sister. I know what you are. Zuri reached across the table and put her hand over Amara's. I need you to trust me the same way you asked me to trust you. When you called Mom without asking. When you told Vera about the case before telling me. You made those calls because you thought they were right. Amara looked at their hands. This is different, she said. Yes, because this one is mine. The silence between them was not comfortable. It was the kind that had weight. Two people who loved each other and were looking at different sides of the same thing. Then Amara turned her hand over and held Zuri's. Come home, she said. I will. Amara squeezed her hand once, then let go and stood up and went to the kitchen to make dinner, which was what she did when she had decided to be done processing something and start managing it instead. Zuri sat at the table and listened to the sounds of her sister moving around the kitchen, the specific creak of the third cabinet door, the way she filled the pot, the low sound of the radio she always turned on while she cooked, and let herself be inside that for a while. Home. Such a strange, persistent word for a feeling that turned out to be so much harder than a location. The following evening arrived the way evenings arrive before things that matter. Too slowly, and then suddenly, the afternoon hours passing in granular detail, and then the light changing and the clock reading. 9 p.m. and the shift from preparation to movement happening before she felt ready. She dressed carefully. Not armor. She wasn't trying to perform strength. She wore what she would have worn to close the bar on a normal Thursday. Dark trousers, a simple top, her green coat. Things that said, I came as I am. Reyes met her outside the Halcyon's building at 10:15. She had 4 plainclothes officers already inside and 4 more positioned outside at staggered points. The building's security had been briefed. 2 cameras had been repositioned to cover the main approach without revealing the change to anyone who'd been inside the bar before. He'll come in the same way he came last time, Reyes said. We're set up for that. He might not, Zuri said. He'll case the entrance first. He'll walk past once, maybe twice. We know. Zuri looked at the building. Where do you want me when he gets here? Reyes asked. Not visible. Not until it's time. We'll be 40 seconds away. 40 seconds is a long time. I know. That's why you're wired. Reyes held up the device, small, flat, the kind that attached with medical tape. And that's why Vera has already set up the bar so there's nothing behind the counter that can be used as a weapon. Zuri thought about that. He doesn't tend toward physical violence. It's not his method. People tend toward things until they don't. Reyes met her eyes. He's desperate. That changes the math. Zuri nodded. She let Reyes attach the wire. She checked her phone. She looked at the building one more time. Then she went inside. The Halcyon after close had a quality she had never experienced before. The room stripped of its performance, chairs not quite pushed in, glasses from the last service still upside down on the drying rack, the ambient lighting running on the maintenance setting, lower than usual, warm and slightly amber. It felt like a theater between shows. She sat at the bar, not behind it. In front of it, on the customer side, on a stool near the center. She had thought about this positioning carefully. Behind the bar was her territory. It might make him feel like she was building a wall between them, which could escalate. In front of it, on a stool, she was accessible. She appeared to have come without defenses. She waited. 11 p.m. passed. 11:10. She watched the entrance. The doors were unlocked. They had been left that way. The late-night staff cleared out early on a fabricated maintenance reason. The room was empty except for her and the 4 plainclothes officers positioned in the back service corridor, behind the kitchen pass-through, in the coat check alcove, and at the table in the northwest corner with a newspaper. The officer at the northwest corner table was sitting in table 1. Zuri had noticed that. She hadn't said anything. At 11:17, the main door opened. Darren Cole walked into the Halcyon. He stopped just inside the entrance and did the thing he always did when he entered a new space. A slow, specific visual inventory, left to right. Exit points, people present. He had always done this, and she had thought for a long time that it was just how he was, alert and careful. and it had taken her much longer than it should have to understand that it was not alertness exactly. It was calculation, the constant automatic measurement of an environment for how much control it offered. He saw her. She watched his face as he processed the scene, the bar, her position on the stool, the amber light, the empty room. Something moved through his expression. Not relaxation exactly, but a kind of confirmation, a validation of what he had believed, that she had reached the limit of her endurance and had finally reached back toward him. He walked across the room toward her. He looked better than she expected. That had always been one of the things. He could look together even when everything was unraveling, could produce calm from his exterior while the interior was something else entirely. He wore a gray jacket, dark pants. His hair was shorter than when he'd walked into this bar before. He looked like a man who had been staying somewhere clean. He sat down on the stool 2 away from her, not directly adjacent, giving her the appearance of space. He had always been good at the appearance of things. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. His voice was the same. She had braced for that, had told herself it would be the same and it would not move her. And she had been right on the first part. "I meant what I said in the message," she said. Her voice came out exactly as she had practiced it, not warm, not cold, present. "You want to understand." He studied her face. "That's what you said." "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, forearms on the bar. "What do you want to understand, Zuri?" The use of her real name. Deliberate, again. I was reminding her that he had known her before, the implication being that he knew her better than anyone, that this name in his mouth was an intimacy she owed him. "Why you won't stop?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he gave a small exhale. Almost a laugh, but not quite. The sound of someone who has been waiting a long time for a question he has the answer to. "Because I love you," he said. "That's it. That's the whole answer. People who love someone don't do what you've done. I made mistakes." He said it easily, the way he said most things, with the surface of sincerity that she had spent 2 years trying to distinguish from the actual thing. "I know that. I've had time to think about it. I pushed too hard. I held on when I should have given you space. But leaving isn't—" He paused, recalibrated. "You didn't give me a chance to fix it." She looked at him. She was acutely aware of the wire under her shirt, of Reyes 40 seconds away, of the officer in the northwest corner who had not turned a page of the newspaper in 4 minutes. "Tell me what you would have fixed," she said, because this was the part she needed. Not for herself. She did not need this information for her own understanding. She had understood Darren Cole for a long time. She needed him to say it. Out loud, on the record, in a room with a working microphone, in the specific language of a man who believed he was having a private conversation with someone he had won back. "I would have given you more room," he said. "I know I was—" Another pause, and here was where she could see him working. Not feeling, constructing. Building the version that would land. "I was too much sometimes. I know that." "Too much," she said. "Intense. I know how I come across. You grabbed my wrist in a public place in front of 30 people. I was scared." The shift in his voice was subtle, but she caught it. The slight increase in pace, the minor elevation in pitch. Defensiveness, trying to stay inside the frame of honesty. "You were disappearing. You'd changed your name. You wouldn't answer calls. I drove all the way here, and I told you to leave. You were angry. I was working. You were running away." She let that settle in the room. "Say that again," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Say what you just said again." He looked at her. Something shifted in his calculation. A small recalibration, a sense that this conversation had moved slightly off the script he'd prepared. "I said you were running." "From what?" "From us." "There is no us." Her voice was very even. "There was never an us. There was you, and there was me learning to become small enough to fit inside what you wanted, and then there was me leaving." The temperature in the room changed, not physically. Nothing moved, but she felt it. The shift that happened inside Darren when his performance met something that refused to respond to it the way it was supposed to. She had felt it before. It always preceded the worst of it. "You really believe that?" he said. His voice was quieter now. "Yes." "You've convinced yourself that everything was one-sided, that I was just—" You hired someone to steal access to my private personnel file, she said. You turned a coworker I trusted into a monitor. You photographed me from a distance and sent me the photograph so I would know I was being watched. You violated a legal protective order multiple times. She looked at him steadily. This is not a story about a relationship that ended badly. This is a story about what you did after I left. He stood up. The stool moved back with a scrape she felt in her chest. I came here because you asked me to, he said. His voice had lost the carefully managed quality. You said you wanted to talk. You said, I know what I said. He looked at her face, and she watched the moment, the precise, specific moment, when he understood. Not everything. Not the wire, not Reyes, not the 4 officers positioned in the room. But enough. The understanding moved across his face in the same order it always did. First the refusal, then the recalculation, then the thing underneath it, the core of it, the part he had been controlling since he walked in. You set me up, he said. She said nothing. You called me here. His voice was rising now, the control slipping in layers the way she'd watched it slip before. You wrote that message and you have been surveilling me for 4 months, she said. You violated a court order. You used someone I trusted to get inside my life. You sent me a photograph to show me that no wall I built was high enough. She stood up from the stool. She was very deliberately not moving toward him or away from him, just standing, present, taking up the space she was entitled to. And you came here tonight because you still believe I belong to you in some category that overrides what I want. That's not Detective Reyes. She said the name clearly. Reyes came through the service door. 2 officers came from the coat check and the kitchen pass simultaneously. Darren turned. He turned back to Zuri. He looked at her face with an expression she had never seen from him. Not anger, not the charming version, not the wounded version. Something stripped of all the management, something raw and almost uncomprehending. You called the police, he said. I called the police 4 months ago, she said. Tonight I just made sure you came to them. The officer from the northwest corner was already at Darren's left side. Darren didn't run. She had not expected him to. He was not someone who ran. He was someone who believed in leverage, and he was looking at her right now, searching for the lever that would still work, cycling through the inventory of things that had worked before. The wounded look, the flat statement, the quiet voice that made her feel she was being hysterical. She held his gaze. She did not give him any of the responses that made those things useful. You're going to regret this, he said. Not a threat? She'd heard his threats, and they had a different quality. This was something more basic than a threat. It was disbelief expressing itself as prophecy. No, she said. I'm not. Reyes was beside him now, had his rights beginning before the words were fully out of his mouth, her voice carrying the flat precision of a woman who had said these words hundreds of times and understood the legal necessity of each syllable. Darren's eyes didn't leave Zuri's face. She held it. She did not look away. She did not soften. She did not provide the small mercy of breaking eye contact that would have let him believe she was uncertain. She stood, and she looked at him, and she let him see exactly who she was. The cuffs went on. He was turned toward the door, and then he stopped. He had something left. She felt it before he deployed it. The last leverage, the one he'd saved, the one he'd been holding because he had understood somewhere in the planning of this that it might come to this moment. He turned his head and looked toward the northwest corner. Tae-jun was standing there. She did not know when he had come in. He was simply there, dark suit, no tie, absolutely still, the way he was always still in a room that required nothing from him. Mr. Park was 2 steps to his left, both of them watching. Darren looked at Tae-jun, then back at Zuri. You think you escaped something, Darren said. You think you made a better choice. His voice was controlled now in a new way. Not the performance, but the stripped-down thing underneath it. Do you know who he is? Do you know what he does? You ran from me straight into, I ran from you, Zuri said. Everything else I chose. He's dangerous, Zuri. I'm not a good person. Okay, fine. For a moment, something genuinely unguarded moved through his face. Something she had never seen. Not remorse, not guilt, but a kind of desperate sincerity that might have been the first real thing he'd ever shown her. But I'm not what he is. You're walking out of something you understand and into something you don't. She looked at him. She looked at Tae-jun. Tae-jun was standing exactly where he had been standing. He had not moved toward her. He had not spoken. He was not performing reassurance or authority or anything at all. He was simply there, present. The decision, as always, sitting entirely with her. She turned back to Darren. "The difference," she said, "is that you never gave me a choice." Reyes moved him toward the door. Darren went. "I went through the main entrance of the Halcyon, past the hostess stand with its empty reservation book, past the coat check where a plainclothes officer held the door, out into the Seattle night, where two uniformed officers were waiting and a patrol car sat at the curb with its lights off. Zuri stayed where she was. She heard the car door close, the specific sound of it, the compression of the seal, the finality of that sound. She looked at the door. She looked at Tae-jun. He crossed the room and stopped several feet from her. Not close, not far. And he looked at her face the way he did, that specific quality of attention that did not take anything and did not perform anything, just saw. "You're all right?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "I think so," she said. He nodded. Reyes appeared at her shoulder. "We need to get a statement, tonight if you're able." "I'm able." Reyes looked at Tae-jun. Tae-jun looked at Reyes. Something passed between them that was not warm and was not hostile, and was entirely professional. Two people who understood each other's position and had tacitly agreed for tonight to share the same goal. "Your people can stand down," Reyes said to him. "They already have," he said. Reyes looked at Zuri. "Ready?" Zuri looked at the door where Darren had gone through. She thought, 4 months. 4 months of documentation and fear and careful, steady maintenance of herself. Of refusing to be made small by the knowledge that he was still out there. Of going to work and pouring wine and holding the notebook and counting breaths and keeping her hands moving. She thought, it's done. She thought, not really. The trial, the testimony, the period of legal machinery grinding forward, not done. Just turned the way a ship turns. The destination changed, the journey still ongoing. "Ready," she said. She walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Tae-jun's quiet footsteps move toward the northwest corner, returning to table 1. The way he always returned, without announcement, without needing to be acknowledged. She didn't look back. She had learned in the past 4 months when looking back was necessary and when it was just an old reflex from the days when she had to monitor where Darren was at all times. This was not that. She pushed through the door. The Seattle rain received her the way it always did, without drama, without welcome, just persistently, completely, on every surface of her at once, and she stood in it for exactly 1 second before Reyes touched her elbow and said, "Car's this way." And she followed, and the door of the Halcyon swung shut behind her with a sound like a chapter ending at precisely the right word. The statement took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Reyes ran it in a small room 2 floors below street level, in a building that smelled like recycled air and old coffee, the kind of institutional space designed to be functional and nothing else. Fluorescent lighting. A table with a scratch across the middle that someone had tried to cover with a strip of tape that had itself peeled halfway off. Zuri sat on one side. Reyes sat on the other with a recorder between them and a legal pad covered in handwriting that Zuri couldn't read upside down. She answered every question, not just the ones Reyes needed. She answered the ones she had been carrying for 11 months, the ones she had documented in the notebook that now contained 47 pages of dates and incidents and observations, the ones that existed in the gap between what she could prove and what she knew to be true. She laid it all out with the same steadiness she had used in the Halcyon, the same flat precision that the prosecutor would later tell her made her an exceptional witness, not because she performed calm, but because she had spent so many months being precise that it had become the natural register of her voice when discussing Darren Cole. At one point, 40 minutes in, Reyes paused the recorder. "You don't have to give me everything tonight," she said. "We have time." Zuri looked at her. "I want to give it tonight," she said. "I want it out of me and into the record. All of it, tonight." Reyes studied her for a moment. Then she reached forward and pressed record again. They kept going. The wire had been removed in the first 5 minutes. A technician had come in, professional and quick, and Zuri had stood with her arms slightly out while the tape was peeled away from her skin, leaving a rectangular ghost of adhesive along her left side. She had looked at that mark afterward and thought, evidence of the evening. One more thing cataloged and documented and made real. At the 2-hour mark, a young officer brought coffee without being asked. Zuri drank it. It tasted like it had been sitting since the afternoon, and she drank it anyway because her hands needed something to hold. At 3 hours and 20 minutes, Reyes clicked the recorder off for the final time. "That's everything we need," she said, "and more." Zuri exhaled. "What happens now?" she said. "He'll be formally charged tomorrow morning. Given the documented violations and the evidence from tonight, the recording, the confession of motive, his presence at the location after multiple restraining order violations, the prosecutor's office will file. There will be an arraignment, a pretrial process, and a trial date." Reyes folded her hands on the table. "This is not a case that ends tomorrow. I want you to understand that." "How long?" 7 months. Possibly 9. The legal process doesn't move the way people want it to. Zuri looked at the scratch on the table. "He's going to be out until the trial," she said. "He's going to be arrested tonight. Bail will be set at the arraignment. Given the pattern of violations, the prosecutor will argue for remand. I can't promise what the judge will do." Reyes met her eyes. "But I can tell you that the case against him is the strongest I have built in 11 years of doing this work. And I have done this work for 11 years. Zuri absorbed that. "Okay," she said. She stood up. Her legs were stiff from 3 hours in the institutional chair. She picked up her coat, which she had draped over the back of the seat, and put it on. The green one, Darren's first glimpse of which had been through a telephoto lens from a distance she still didn't know, and she buttoned it methodically from the bottom. "Zuri," Reyes said. She looked up. "Tonight mattered," Reyes said. "What you did in that room, the composure, the preparation, the way you held the line when he tried to shift the frame, that matters for the outcome." She paused. "I've worked cases where the victim was too frightened to testify at all, too worn down. You gave us everything we needed, and you did it on your own terms." Zuri looked at her for a moment. "I had a lot of help," she said. "You used the help well," Reyes said. "That's also a skill." Zuri put her hand on the door. Then she stopped. "Detective Reyes." "Yes." "The clerk at the department, the one who was selling access to the case file." She turned. "What happens to him?" Reyes's expression tightened by a fraction. "He's been suspended pending investigation. The DA's office is reviewing charges." "Will it stick?" A pause that was a fraction too long. "We're going to make sure it does," Reyes said. Zuri nodded. She opened the door. She walked out into the hallway, which was longer than she remembered walking in, and then through a set of double doors into the lobby, and then through the lobby into the Seattle night, which was still raining, which she had expected, which had stopped surprising her months ago. She stood on the steps of the building and breathed. The cold air came in and went out, and she let it do that several times before she moved. Then she walked to where Amara's car was parked. She had borrowed it for tonight, her own car still at the Halcyon. And she got in and sat in the driver's seat and put her hands on the wheel and did not start the engine. She cried. Not the controlled kind, not the kind she had allowed herself in small, monitored doses over the past 11 months. The brief necessary releases that she had scheduled and contained, bathroom door locked, exhaust fan running, 20 minutes precisely. This was the other kind, the kind that did not ask permission and did not have a timeline. The kind that came from somewhere below the part of her that had been managing everything so carefully for so long, from the place where she had been storing the unprocessed material of the past year and a half. It lasted 12 minutes. She knew because she looked at the clock at the beginning and at the end, not to time it, but because she had developed the habit of knowing what time things happened. Then it was done. She started the engine. She drove to Amara's apartment. Amara was awake. Of course she was. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had probably been hot an hour ago and her phone face up in front of her, and when Zuri came through the door, she looked up and performed the specific Amara variant of composure. The face that meant she had been afraid and was not going to lead with that, because fear was not what was needed right now. "Done?" she said. "Done." Amara stood up and came around the table and hugged her. It was not a gentle hug. It was the kind that Amara had always given. Full and slightly too tight and lasting about 4 seconds longer than most people's hugs lasted. The physical expression of a person who had decided that if you were going to hug someone, you might as well mean it. Zuri held on. When they separated, Amara looked at her face. You cried, she said. In the car. Good. Amara went to the stove. Are you hungry? No. I'm making eggs anyway. Zuri sat down at the table. She watched her sister move around the kitchen, the specific Amara choreography she had been watching her whole life, efficient and slightly impatient, the way she cracked eggs with one hand because her two hands had always seemed unnecessary to her, and she let the ordinary domestic sound of it fill the space where everything else had been. They're charging him tonight, Zuri said. Amara cracked the second egg. And Bria? Separately, the DA's office. The clerk. Under investigation. Amara was quiet for a moment. The eggs went into the pan. Did they do what you needed them to do? She said. Zuri thought about the question. Yes and no, she said. The system worked the way it's supposed to, which is, she paused, slower and smaller and more partial than what actually happened to me. But it worked. Amara plated the eggs. She set them in front of Zuri with a piece of toast. Eat, she said. Zuri ate. The eggs were slightly oversalted, which had always been Amara's one consistent cooking failure, and she ate them completely, every bite, because her sister had made them at nearly 2 in the morning, because Zuri had needed something solid, and that mattered regardless of the seasoning. When she was done, she pushed the plate aside. I need to find my own place, she said. I've been thinking about the waterfront, East Lake maybe. Amara sat down across from her. How long have you been thinking about this? A few months? I kept not saying it because it felt ungrateful. It's not ungrateful. I know. But I needed to not say it until I was sure I was saying it because I wanted it, and not because she searched for the right framing, not because something was pushing me out. Amara looked at her steadily. Nothing is pushing you out, she said. I know that now. Zuri looked at the table. I think I needed to know I could stay, so that leaving was a choice. Amara was quiet for a moment. The waterfront is expensive, she said. I know. Bar manager pays better than bartender. I know. You already talked to Vera. She offered me the position 2 weeks ago. Zuri looked up. I wanted to tell you after tonight. I didn't want there to be too many things at once. Amara reached across and put her hand flat on the table between them, not quite touching Zuri's hand, just placing it there, an offering of presence without demand. You're going to be okay, Amara said. It was not a question. It was not reassurance performing itself as a fact. It was the simple statement of someone who had watched a person she loved survive something and was naming what she saw. Yeah, Zuri said. I think so. The arraignment was 9 days later. Bail was denied. The prosecutor had argued remand on the grounds of demonstrated pattern, multiplied violations, and risk of continued harm, and the judge had agreed with the specific efficiency of a judge who had reviewed the same documented facts that Reyes had assembled and found them sufficient. Zuri was not in the courtroom for the arraignment. She had chosen not to be. Not because she was afraid of seeing him, she had moved past that particular threshold in the halcyon, but because the arraignment was not her moment. It was a procedural milestone in a process that would have many procedural milestones, and she could not attend all of them without making the legal process the whole of her life. And she was trying, actively and deliberately, not to let Darren Cole be the whole of her life any longer. She went to work instead. She opened the bar at the Halcyon, did the inventory she had started doing as bar manager, reviewed the reservation list for the week, and had a 20-minute conversation with Vera about a supplier issue that needed resolving. Ordinary work. The specific texture of a day that is about what it's supposed to be about, rather than about surviving what it contains. At noon, Reyes texted, "Remand granted. He's in custody until trial." Zuri read it standing at the bar. She wrote back, "Thank you." Then she put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. She found the East Lake apartment on a Tuesday in early January. She had been looking for 6 weeks by then. A focused, deliberate search. The way she did things now, with a list of requirements she had been honest with herself about rather than practical about. Water view. Natural light on at least 2 sides, high enough to see over the immediate street, a kitchen with counter space that was not an afterthought, a neighborhood she could walk at night without running the old calculations. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building that had been converted from something else. She could tell from the proportions of the windows, which were taller than residential windows tended to be. industrial in a way that let in the gray January light in broad, flat sheets. The main room looked over a narrow strip of Lake Union between two other buildings. Not an unobstructed view, not the kind of water view that justified the premium, but real water, visible water, the specific dark surface of the lake in winter with the city's reflection running across it in smeared lines. She stood at the window for a long time. The property manager was a patient woman named June who had learned to let people stand at the windows for as long as they needed because she had been renting Seattle apartments for 20 years and understood that people made their decisions at windows, not at the lease table. "I'll take it," Zuri said. June said, "I'll get the paperwork." Zuri stayed at the window until June came back. Moving took one weekend. She did not have much. 4 months at Amara's had kept her acquisitions deliberate, the kind of accumulation you do when you know the things need to fit in a borrowed space and you haven't yet decided what the permanent space will require. What she had was specific, books she had bought because she wanted them and not because a shelf needed filling. A kitchen knife set she had purchased herself, the first set of knives she had owned that had been chosen entirely on her own criteria. Clothes that were hers in the sense of having been chosen without a second voice in her head editing towards someone else's preference. Amara helped her move. They rented a van and did 3 trips over Saturday and Sunday and spent the second evening assembling a bookshelf that had instructions in 4 languages and clear utility in none of them until the 4th hour of effort, at which point it became a functional bookshelf, and they sat on the floor and ate takeout directly from the containers. And Amara said, "You need a couch." "I know. You need a couch urgently. You cannot live like this." "I'm going to get one next week." "I have a friend who's selling." "I'm going to get my own couch." Amara looked at her. "Okay," she said. "Good." They ate in the bare apartment with the Lake Union window dark behind them, and the building finding its sounds around them. The specific acoustic signature of a new space, which Zuri had been taught by 11 months of hyper-alertness to read carefully, and which this one was beginning to teach her something different, that unfamiliar sounds were not threats by default, that a building settling and a pipe running and the upstairs neighbor's footsteps were just the sounds of a building, being a building, and she was allowed to live inside that without running the old calculations. She practiced not running the old calculations. It took longer than she expected. It was going to keep taking longer, she suspected, for some time. She called her mother on a Sunday in February. Not because she was ready, she had stopped waiting to be ready, having decided that readiness was a condition she had been using as a reason to postpone things that needed doing, rather than a genuine state she was approaching. She called because it was time, and because her mother was frightened, and because she had things to say that needed to be said out loud to the person they were about. Her mother answered immediately, which meant she had been watching for the call. "Zuri," she said. "Hi, Mom." A pause that contained several things: relief and anxiety and the specific held breath quality of a person who has been waiting for this call for months and is not sure what version of it has arrived. "How are you?" her mother said. "Getting better," Zuri said. "It's slow, but it's real." Her mother stopped, started again. "I've been thinking about what I said after you left him, the first time we talked." "I know. I've been thinking about it for months. I said something I shouldn't have said, and I said it at the worst possible time, and I've been trying to figure out Mom, how to tell you that I know I said the wrong, Mom." Zuri's voice was gentle but firm. "I know." A silence. "I need you to hear the rest of it," her mother said. "I need to say it." Zuri sat on the floor of the East Lake apartment. She still didn't have a couch. With her back against the wall below the tall window, the lake a dark presence outside the glass. "Okay," she said. Her mother said, "I made your leaving about your choices, about your pattern, about things you could have done differently. And I did that because I was frightened, and because I didn't know how to be frightened without turning it into analysis, and because," her voice broke slightly, controlled itself, "because I had raised you to be strong enough to leave situations like that. And I felt like a failure that you had stayed so long, and instead of feeling that as my own thing, I put it onto you." Zuri sat with that. "You weren't a failure," she said. "I didn't tell you how bad it was. I should have seen." He was very careful about what he let people see. "I should have." "Mom." Zuri's voice was careful. We can go around in that loop for a long time. He was skilled at hiding it. You didn't see it all. I didn't tell you all of it. Both of those things are true, and neither of them are the point." Her mother was quiet. "What's the point?" she said finally, and it came out smaller than her mother's voice usually came out, stripped of the usual authority, which told Zuri more than any other part of the conversation had about how much this had cost her. "The point," Zuri said, "is that I'm okay, and that I need you to let me be okay without making my recovery into a conversation about what came before it." She paused. "I need you to ask me about my apartment and my job and what I'm cooking for dinner, and let me tell you about those things before we talk about anything heavier. I need to be a person to you before I'm a story." A very long silence. Then her mother said, "What are you cooking for dinner?" Zuri exhaled. "I don't have a couch yet," she said. "So I'm eating on the floor. I made soup." "What kind?" "Tomato, from scratch. The tomatoes are terrible in February, but I wanted the process of it." "Your grandmother used to say that," her mother said. "That some recipes are about the making more than the eating." "Yeah," Zuri said. "I think that's right." They talked for an hour and 10 minutes. The trial date was set for the second week of May. 7 months from the night in the Halcyon, 7 months during which the legal machinery did what it did. Discovery, motions, the defense's various attempts to suppress or reframe or reduce, each of which met the documented record and found it less flexible than they had hoped. The prosecutor called Zuri twice to update her and once to prepare her for the testimony she would give, walking her through the process with the specific care of someone who understood the difference between a witness who had the facts and a witness who could deliver them in a way a jury could receive. During those 7 months, Zuri did the following. She accepted the bar manager position at the Halcyon. The salary increase was real, and she allowed herself to feel the reality of it without immediately calculating what she would spend it on. She let it exist for a few weeks as just a number, evidence of her value in a place that had required her to demonstrate it rather than taking it on faith. She bought a couch. She chose it herself after looking at 12 options over 3 weekends, and it was the color of old mustard and slightly larger than the room strictly required, and she loved it immediately and completely without qualification, which was a feeling she had started to recognize as one of the benefits of making your own decisions, the way they settle into you without the background noise of someone else's preferences. She went to therapy. This was the thing she had been circling for months. Not because she doubted its value, but because starting required acknowledging that what she carried was not something she could manage alone by being sufficiently disciplined, and she had been disciplined for so long that admitting its limits felt like a kind of defeat. She went anyway. The therapist was a black woman in her 50s named Dr. Osai, who had a practice in the Capitol Hill neighborhood and who had been working with survivors of coercive control for 20 years, and who said, in the second session, something that reorganized a significant portion of the architecture Zuri had built around the past 2 years. The fact that you left doesn't mean you were never shaped by staying. Both things are true at the same time, and they don't cancel each other out. Zuri had sat with that for the rest of the day. She kept going back. She went home to see her mother in July, as she had promised. The trip lasted 9 days. It was difficult in the specific ways she had expected, and easier in ways she hadn't. She slept in her childhood bedroom with the same window she had looked out of as a teenager, and spent 2 afternoons in the kitchen with her mother working through her grandmother's recipe for a dish that required 3 hours and constant attention and produced at the end something neither of them had managed to replicate exactly right, which her mother said was because her grandmother had never written down the real amounts, and Zuri thought was more likely because some things can't be replicated. They can only be made again, differently, with what you currently have. On the last evening, her mother sat beside her on the porch and said, without preamble, "That man you mentioned, the one at the bar." Zuri looked at her. "Amara mentioned him," her mother said, not apologetically, as a fact. "What did Amara say?" "That he's complicated." "He is." "Are you?" "We've had dinner," Zuri said. "Several times. I don't know what it is yet, and I'm not going to pretend I do." Her mother was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard where the light was going amber in the early evening. "Your father was complicated," she said. Zuri looked at her. Her father had died when Zuri was 11. She did not talk about him often. Her mother talked about him even less, and when she did, it was usually in the tight language of a person who had processed a grief fully and stored it somewhere organized and only retrieved it deliberately. What do you mean? Zuri said. I mean, he was not a simple man. Her mother adjusted her position on the bench. He had parts of himself that were difficult, that he was working on for his whole life. Some of them he resolved, some of them he didn't have enough time to. A pause. What I knew from the beginning was that he was honest about what he was. He didn't show me a version of himself designed to get me and then become someone else. She looked at Zuri. That's the thing, not the complications, the honesty about them. Zuri held that for a moment. He's been honest with me, she said. Then take your time, her mother said. But don't let the fact that you got hurt before convince you that you can't read people. You can. You've always been able to. She paused. You read Darren Cole eventually. You just didn't have the comparison point yet. Zuri looked at the evening light in the yard. That's the most useful thing you've ever said to me, she said. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I'm capable of useful things occasionally, she said. The trial began on a gray Monday in May. Zuri dressed carefully. She had thought about this for days. Not in the way she once thought about dressing, running every choice through the filter of what someone else would approve of, but deliberately, with the specific intentionality of a person choosing what they bring to something that matters. She wore a dark blue dress she had bought in March. Simple, well-made, nothing that performed either fragility or aggression. She wore the earrings Amara had given her for her last birthday. Small gold hoops, understated. She wore her green coat because it was May in Seattle, and the coat was hers, and she had decided, somewhere in the winter, that she was not going to stop wearing it because Darren had photographed her in it. She arrived at the courthouse at 8:45. Reyes met her at the entrance, which she had offered to do, and which Zuri had accepted because it was practical, and not because she needed to be led anywhere. How are you? Reyes said. Ready, Zuri said. They went in. The trial lasted 4 days. The prosecution presented the case with the methodical precision that 11 months of documentation made possible: the incident log, the security footage from the Halcyon on 2 separate nights, the call records, the credential theft. Bria Landau's testimony delivered via agreement with the plea deal she had taken in exchange for cooperation, the photographs Darren had sent, the wire recording from the night in the Halcyon in which his own words, placed on the record, demonstrated motive, intent, and explicit acknowledgement of what he had done. Bria testified on the second day. Zuri sat in the gallery and watched her. Bria had the quality of a person who had been running a performance for so long that she was not entirely sure where it ended, and she began. She was composed on the stand, her answers calibrated, cooperative in the specific way of someone who had been told by their attorney that cooperation was their best available strategy. She explained the history with Darren, the prior relationship, the contact he'd reestablished after Zuri arrived at the Halcyon, his initial framing of it as harmless, the slow escalation of what he asked her to do, the point at which she understood it had crossed from gray into something she didn't have a neutral word for. At one point, the prosecutor asked, "Did you understand that your actions were causing harm to Zuri Bennett?" Bria looked at her hands. "Yes." "When did you understand that?" A pause. "The night he came into the bar," she said. "I watched it happen. I knew he was going to come in. He had told me what he was planning. I thought I would feel—" She stopped. "I thought I was helping him fix something. After I watched it, I understood that there was nothing to fix, that what he wanted and what he'd told me he wanted were different. And yet you continued." Another pause, longer. "Yes," she said. Zuri sat and listened and felt the specific complexity of looking at someone who had been used as a tool and had agreed to be the tool and had suffered some of the consequences of that agreement. She did not feel uncomplicated things about Bria. She felt the anger that Bria deserved, and also a cooler, more difficult recognition that Darren was skilled at finding and cultivating the specific vulnerabilities in people that made them useful to him, and that Bria's vulnerability had simply been a different shape than her own. That didn't absolve Bria. It also didn't simplify her. Zuri filed it in the growing drawer of things that were true simultaneously. She testified on the third day. The prosecutor's direct examination took 2 hours and 14 minutes. She answered every question in the same register she had used with Reyes in every prior statement: specific, grounded, sequential, free of the editorializing that defense attorneys exploited. She described the flower, the calls, the credential theft and what it meant about his access to her life. The night at the Halcyon, the first one, with his hand on her wrist. The photograph sent to her phone. The message. The careful 11-month process of building a case while continuing to exist inside her own life. She did not describe her feelings. She described her actions and his actions, and let those be sufficient. The cross-examination was 43 minutes. The defense attorney tried several approaches. He questioned the interpretation of individual incidents. He suggested the protective order message had constituted entrapment. He asked about the nature of her relationship with Kang Tae-jun. The question arriving carefully, wrapped in procedure, but aimed at the same target Darren had aimed at in the Halcyon, the suggestion that she had exchanged one dangerous man for another. Zuri looked at the attorney. My personal relationships are not relevant to whether Darren Cole violated a court order, she said. The prosecutor objected. Sustained. The attorney moved on. At the end of the cross-examination, he asked, Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that on the night of the incident at the Halcyon, you were not acting alone, that you had coordinated with parties outside of law enforcement to ensure a particular outcome? I coordinated with Detective Reyes and the Seattle Police Department, Zuri said. The operation was fully sanctioned. Were there other parties present that evening with knowledge of the plan? People who cared about my safety knew I was doing something that night. I didn't provide operational details to anyone outside of law enforcement. The attorney looked at his notes. That's all. She stepped down. She walked back to the gallery seat. She did not look at Darren as she passed the defense table, not from avoidance, but from the specific recognition that he was not the center of this room, and she was not required to acknowledge him as such. The jury was out for 5 hours and 40 minutes. Zuri sat in the corridor outside the courtroom with Reyes on one side and Amara, who had taken the afternoon off from the hospital, on the other. They didn't talk much. Amara had brought coffee from outside, the real kind, from a place 2 blocks away, and they drank it and sat in the institutional corridor and waited. At 4:17 p.m., the bailiff appeared. They went back in. The foreperson read the verdict. Guilty, 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 guilty. 4 counts, each one its own complete sound, arriving in the courtroom and settling into the specific silence that follows a verdict, which is not like other silences. It is the silence of something being made official, of a thing that was real being acknowledged as real by a formal mechanism that carries the weight of consequence. Zuri sat in the gallery and heard each one. She did not cry. She had expected to, had braced for it, had her composure carefully assembled against the possibility. Instead, she felt something quieter and harder to name than relief. Something like the specific sensation of a door being closed that has been left open for a very long time in a draft. Not the drama of slamming, just the solid functional click of a latch catching. She looked at Darren. He was looking at the table. Then, as if he felt the weight of it, he looked up. Not at the jury, not at the judge, at Zuri. She held his gaze. He was the one who looked away. Sentencing was 6 weeks later. She attended. The judge reviewed the prosecution's recommendation, the defense's mitigation arguments, the victim impact statement that Zuri had written and submitted, 3 pages, double-spaced, that had taken her 9 drafts to produce because she had kept writing toward either too much anger or too much restraint. And the honest version was neither of those things. The honest version was something more complicated and more tired and more real. The sentence, 4 years, with conditions attached to any release that would outlast the sentence by 5 years. No contact, ever. GPS monitoring for the initial post-release period, mandatory intervention programming. She stood outside the courthouse afterward in the June air, which was doing the thing Seattle June occasionally managed. Actually warm, actual sun, the kind of day that felt like an argument for everything. Reyes stood beside her. It's not enough, Zuri said. No, Reyes said. It's rarely enough. But it's something. It's something significant. The conditions are significant. Sentencing like this with these attached terms is not routine. She paused. You built the case that made this possible. The 11 months of documentation, every date and call and photograph. That record is why the judge had the latitude she had. Zuri looked at the courthouse steps, the street, the ordinary city moving past. What do I do with it now? She said. Not a real question. She was not asking Reyes. She was saying it out loud to hear how it sounded. You go live your life, Reyes said. Sounds simple. It doesn't, actually. No, Reyes almost smiled. But you're going to be good at it. Summer arrived. The Eastlake apartment in summer was a different space than it had been in January. The light changed everything, came in through the tall windows at angles that moved across the floors in the morning and the walls in the afternoon, and turned the visible slice of Lake Union from a dark winter mirror into something reflective and alive. She grew 2 plants on the windowsill. She bought a real coffee maker. She learned the names of her neighbors, the retired couple on the ground floor who kept a careful garden, the graduate student upstairs whose footsteps she had learned to read as studious and irregular. She called Dr. Osei every Tuesday. She called her mother every Sunday. She worked Thursday through Monday at the Halcyon and spent Tuesday and Wednesday doing the things that constituted having a life: grocery shopping, cooking, reading, walking the neighborhoods around the lake. Small, ordinary practices that were not small were in fact the specific substance of what she had been working toward. Days that belonged entirely to herself. Tae-jun appeared on Thursdays. The dinners had continued, 11 of them by July, each one different, each one mapping new territory in the slow, ongoing project of 2 complicated people trying to understand what they were to each other. He had told her more about the dismantling, the specifics of it, the legal restructuring, the legitimate businesses he was moving into managed independence, the relationships he was severing and the cost of those severances, which was real and ongoing and which he did not present as noble but as what he had decided, at 40, that he could live with. She listened. She understood that what he was describing was a kind of difficult, sustained voluntary change, the kind that happened not because someone forced it or because the circumstances made it unavoidable, but because a person looked at what they had inherited and decided, without drama, to dismantle it. She understood what that cost. She had been doing her own version of it. One evening in August, sitting on the mustard couch with the late summer light going horizontal across the floor, she said, "What do you want?" Eventually. "From this." He looked at her. "From us," she clarified. He was quiet for a moment, the specific Tae-jun quiet that she had learned to wait out rather than fill. "I want to find out," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the honest one." He looked at the light on the floor. "I've spent most of my adult life being very certain about what I wanted, because certainty was what my world required. I'm learning that certainty and honesty are not always the same thing." He looked at her. "What do I want?" "I want to keep having these evenings. I want to know who you are in a year, because the person I see is someone who is actively becoming, and I find that more interesting than anything I have been around in a long time." She looked at him. "That's still not a complete answer," she said. "No," he said, "but I think it's the right size for right now." She thought about that. "Okay," she said. She looked at the light on the floor. "I want to stop bracing," she said. "That's what I want. I want to get to a place where I stop waiting for the other shoe, where I can be in a room, this room, any room, and not be cataloging exits. You'll get there." "I know," she exhaled. "I'm impatient with myself about it." "You've been doing it for 11 months, he said. "You spent 2 years being trained to do it. Give it the time it needs." She looked at him. "You sound like my therapist," she said. "Your therapist sounds smart." "She is." A silence that was comfortable. The particular comfortable silence that she had learned was one of the reliable indicators of something real. The way 2 people can be quiet together, and the quiet is not a problem to be filled. She reached out and put her hand on his forearm. He looked at it, then at her. She said, "I'm glad you came back. Every Thursday." He said, "There was no other Thursday I wanted to spend." She held that. She did not immediately deflect it or qualify it or receive it with the cautious skepticism she had been maintaining as reasonable protection. She let it land and stay where it landed. "Okay," she said. They sat in the late summer light. The November rain returned. It announced itself the way it always did, not dramatically, just reasserting its prior claim on the city, resuming the occupation of every surface and every sound. She had lived through it once already in Seattle, had been inside it for the worst months of the past year, and now she was inside it again in a different apartment with a different life arranged around her, and the rain was the same and she was not. She closed her last Thursday shift at the Halcyon and did the manager's end of night, the final inventory, the handoff to overnight security, the walk through the bar, checking the things she had started checking automatically in the months she had been running the room. She was good at this job. She had been good at it since the beginning, but now she was good at it in the way that comes from being trusted with something and trusting yourself to do it, which was a different and more solid kind of good. She came out through the front entrance. Tae-jun was under the awning. The collar of his coat was turned up against the rain. He had his hands in his pockets. He was watching the street with the particular quality of attention that she recognized as his natural state in any room. Alert, without being tense, present, without demanding anything from the space. "You didn't have to wait," she said. "I know," he said. She stood beside him under the awning. The rain came down on the street. The city made its sounds. A car somewhere, someone's music from an upper window, the specific ambient frequency of a city that never fully went to sleep. She had learned to hear these sounds differently than she once had. They had stopped being potential threats and become what they were, just the sounds of other people's lives, continuing as lives did. "Can I walk you home?" he said. She had been thinking in the past weeks about what she wanted to say when he asked this again. She had constructed several versions of it, careful ones, measured ones, the kind that gave him precisely the information she intended to give him, and no more. She had revised them. She had discarded most of them, because what she wanted to say was not careful and not measured. It was just true. "You can," she said, "and when we get there, I'd like you to come up." He looked at her. She held his gaze without managing it. "Okay," he said. They stepped out from under the awning into the rain. It came down on both of them equally, the way rain does. Indifferent and complete, not choosing, just present. She felt it on her shoulders and in her hair and on the back of her hands, which were not in her pockets, which were just out, in the open, the way she was increasingly allowing herself to be. He did not take her hand. She reached for his. He closed his fingers around hers and they walked forward into the wet street and the November city, past the bar and the hotel and the ordinary storefronts going dark for the night, past the corner where the gray sedan had sat a year ago, past the bus stop where she had once stood and felt the specific sensation of being watched. She walked past those places, and they were just places. The lake appeared at the end of a cross street, the same dark water she could see from her apartment window, the same city reflected in it in amber lines that the rain was breaking into something abstract and impermanent. She looked at it as they passed. The walk to Eastlake took 14 minutes. She had timed it once, months ago, the first time she had walked it alone at night after moving in, testing herself against the old reflex, checking whether she could do it without the exits catalog running in her head. She had done it in 16 minutes that night, the extra 2 from stopping twice to prove to herself she wasn't hurrying. She walked it in 14 now, a natural pace, not proving anything. They went up the stairs. She unlocked the door. She turned on the lamp inside, the one by the couch, warm-toned, the light it made falling across the mustard couch, and the bookshelf she had filled over the months, and the 2 plants on the windowsill, which were not thriving, but were continuing, which she counted as sufficient progress. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room the way he took in all rooms, not calculating, just seeing. "This is yours," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He came inside. She closed the door. They stood in the small hallway for a moment, rain damp, the city shut out, the apartment making its settling sounds around them. She looked at him. He was watching her face with the quality of attention she had been trying for months to understand and had finally arrived at a word for. It was not possession. It was not the attention of someone measuring what they owned or intended to own. It was the attention of someone genuinely trying to see another person, not to catalog them, not to find the access point, but simply to see. She had wanted to be seen like that for so long that she had almost accepted not being seen at all. She stepped toward him. She put her hand flat on his chest, not reaching, just placing, feeling the solidity of it, the steady pressure of his breathing underneath her palm. He put his hand over hers. She looked up at him. She thought about all the things that had led to this room, the garbage bags and the bruised wrist, and Amara's kitchen, and a name she had borrowed, and the notebook and the flower in the alley, and Bria, and the wire against her skin, and the car door closing, and the courtroom, and the verdict, and the apartment, and the couch. She had chosen herself and the Thursday dinners and the slow, careful construction of a self that had not been built for anyone else's purposes. She thought about the woman who had apologized for things she hadn't done. She thought, I am not her anymore. She thought, I have not been her for a long time. She thought, this is what the rest of it looks like. Zuri, he said. Her name. Just that. She had spent 4 months using a borrowed name to survive. She had spent 11 months taking her own name back, saying it, writing it, hearing it, learning again the way it fit in her own mouth and other people's mouths, the way it felt like herself rather than like exposure. He said it like it was the only name he had ever intended to call her. Yeah, she said. She lifted herself onto her toes. She kissed him. It was not the beginning of something that had already happened, was already months behind them, was already in the accumulated weight of Thursday evenings, and the first dinner and the phone call at midnight, and the walk through the rain and the hand closed over hers on a wet Seattle street. This was not the beginning. This was the arrival, quiet, real, without performance. The rain came down outside the tall windows. The lake did its dark, patient thing below the city. Zuri Bennett stood in her apartment, in her own name, in the life she had been building since she first walked out of Darren Cole's world with 2 garbage bags and the bruised wrist and the knowledge, stubborn and battered and still there, that she deserved better than what she had been given. She was still figuring out what that looked like. She suspected she would be figuring it out for the rest of her life, in the specific way that people who have survived something and come out the other side continue to figure things out, not because they are broken, but because they are alive. Because living is the ongoing project, because there is no fixed point at which a person finishes becoming. But tonight, in this room, in the November rain, this was enough. This was, in fact, more than enough. This was the beginning of ordinary. And ordinary, she had learned, was the rarest and most hard-won thing there was.